First of all, good morning, Tom, and thank you for having me as well. I'm Eirini. Originally, I am from Greece, and I moved to the UK about 13 years ago, primarily to study psychology, and I did my degree in psychology. And then I started working for about 5 years as a rehabilitation support worker. My expertise was working with young adults with neurodiverse conditions, and that's, I guess, where my passion about my master's in neuroscience came from. So I moved in to do a master's in neuroscience, and I absolutely loved it. While I was doing my master's, I moved into I kind of like fell into talent acquisition role, and that's when I realized actually I love this. Through there, I decided to use what I've learned from academia and wherever possible apply it to my role. So currently I am the talent acquisition manager for DE2 Healthcare. So DE2 Healthcare is the biggest provider for 111 service in the UK, covering all Midlands, East and West, and some regions of London. So we cover a lot of ground.
You obviously talked about the industry that you work in at the moment, and I imagine, given some of my knowledge, it's quite a challenging industry at the moment. How are you finding things out there?
Yes, definitely. I think it's always been kind of like challenging, but I think it's a brand new world ever since COVID-19 hit, and it had many repercussions. It's kind of like a domino effect, and it's a challenging field for many reasons. From a kind of like candidate perspective, right now, it's very candidate heavy. There is a lot of people out there that are looking for a job for multiple reasons. I think one of the biggest would be redundancies happening all over, and that means that there's such a big workforce that ultimately all of them together are getting out in the market trying to find positions. So the ratio is definitely impacted in that respect. So we have a lot of people looking at the same time, but the jobs would probably be, I would say, 1 in 10, 15. Yeah. So a lot of really, even from my previous role, a lot of really good candidates that are essentially competing at the same time for roles. And we see a lot of people who have a lot of knowledge and a lot of experience, ultimately because they want to go back to workforce because, well, for financial reasons, or because they really love what they do and they want to go back to do it and not just, taking very lots big breaks, decide to take, step downs ultimately. And so you always have someone really keen to go and maybe do a role that they've done in the past and might not be utilizing their abilities and their skills to the best. But you have the other side as well from the employers. I think it's always been a thing where we're looking at candidates who have more seniority, looking for roles that they're not up to that level, with a bit of suspicion, and not necessarily want to give them that the opportunity because of a lot of different things, commitment, the fear of someone just weren't getting the better opportunity, really leaving, the investment, and so forth. So it's really tough in the market right now, in my opinion. And from a first point of view, you'd think, okay, well, it's very candidate heavy, so it must be very easy for recruiters to go out and find the right people. But I don't think it's so simple, because it's not just black and white. There is so many variations of gray in between, and I guess that is a big part of difference between, I guess, recruitment and talent acquisition, isn't it? Getting the right people in and making sure they stay, and the succession planning and all of that. But how can you create a succession planning when you have candidates or you have employees that their skills are not really utilized effectively in their roles, and what is the next step for them as well?
Has the market sort of forced you to change your ways of working?
Yes, but I think this is very normal in talent acquisition, isn't it? Like, we always change the way we're working because, well, we will be left behind, and we'll be doing ourselves and the candidates a disservice if we don't. So absolutely, it has, yeah, definitely. But it is, I think it's part of the role that I really enjoy, always looking how to get better. I think there's no such thing as, there's this expression, if it ain't broken, don't fix it. And I think to me, it's always like chalk to my ears, like someone is just thing that chalk on the boards. Yeah, I absolutely hate it. I think I first heard it when I was working for a different NHS commissioning support unit at the time, and it was a person that I worked with, and they kind of like brought that up in a meeting, and instantly like I cringed, because it's just it's that kind of like the balance, right? We always want to make sure you're getting better, but this at the right pace.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like how we make sure that we're always changing for the better, but for at the right time as well, because change for the sake of change can actually be so counterproductive.
Yeah,
I think.
It's about making sure the changes you make are appropriate, isn't it? But also, so winning attitudes and hearts around to that change.
Exactly. And they're digestible as well, because if you throw like 100 changes all at once, well, chances are nothing is going to stick. I was listening really to a podcast, the Diaries of a CEO, and there was a mental health practitioner and doctor. She was actually saying that people are inclined and wired to only be able to process 2 big changes at a time. If you add to your system more than that, it is either not going to be able to process, or they're not going to stick.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like making sure that the prioritization and really looking at the vision of where you want to go, and then creating that roadmap of how you're going to get there and what needs to come first. But always with the view things that do change, and be having that agility and adaptability on how we're going to get to where we want to go. And ultimately, always, that's why I always tell my team, keep thinking, okay, where we started, where we want to go, is it still where we need to land?
Yeah.
Is it part of the journey, or actually we need to divert and just go somewhere else, because it might not be the right thing for us. It might be when we started, but we're in a world constantly changing, and AI and everything. We didn't have well, we did, but it wasn't so widespread. So we need to constantly changing the way that we do, we do things, and the way that our practices to, one, incorporate the changes, but also to mitigate the risk that come with those changes as well.
Yeah. Are you seeing an impact of AI growing on the work that you do on a daily basis?
Absolutely. From our side as well, I think, like, company, I've seen a lot of people looking at AI with suspicion, and also a bit of a shame as an embarrassment to say that they're using it, for example, ChatGPT, as a tool to, for drafting emails, for example. We're going to do a big audience, or kind of like, to just make those changes where they need to be, and people, and I think it's very often because people are part of it. I think I related to imposter syndrome, that it affects a lot of people, but it is, I think, hardwired in people thinking that I need to be doing everything myself. If I show that I did not know something, or I get help, I'm gonna look as incompetent, or people, they're not gonna take me as seriously, or whatever that might be. And therefore, I think a lot of people are doing it, but not as many feel confident enough to say, okay, I'm using it, but I'm using it as an effective tool rather than something that is doing my job for me. So it's just kind of like, it's a tool similar to Word, Excel, for example. We're using it every single day. You're not gonna, these are not something that is going to do the job for us, because ultimately we have critical thinking and we know what we need to do. By utilizing in a way that it combines all the information and makes research so much faster, it's I think it's a disservice really to us not utilizing it, but appropriately. So you can't really be making decisions for us, but using it as a research tool, because in a few seconds it can combine research through all different websites across the internet. That'll probably take someone 2 years to go through and brings it forward. But we do see it a lot, I think, with candidates. I think a lot of people are using it as part of like their application. For example, one easy to find in a CV building or cover letter, or doing the preparation for their interviews, which is good as a tool to help them prepare. But then that's the other part of the scale, is how do we ensure that we're using it in the right way, so not scripting and coming into an interview and just feeding really the interviewer what they want to hear, we think they want to hear, but not how we assess essentially with the right still with the right criteria. It is it's very big hot topic right now, and another reason is we are looking to implement a behavioral assessment platform. We're actually in the process of doing that, and one I was looking in the market and doing a lot of different research to speak with suppliers. A big part of it is AI tools and how susceptible they are.
Yeah.
Like, for example, like those situational judgment tests. Nowadays, yes, they can give you an accurate presentation of how someone would do the job, but it depends on how you're going to assess for it. So if you kind of like as part of the interview, yes, you might get the right answer, but if you have it as part of an assessment, it is very AI susceptible. So it is it's as everything is how we use it, and to use it and not abuse it.
Yeah, no, great. With regards to assessments, and you bring that in, and I think really validly, do you think that there is potential, because AI is, as you rightly pointed out, there's still an element of human intervention with AI. Do you think, in your view, that AI is therefore susceptible to creating some bias based on the input factors, and that could potentially have a negative impact on candidates?
Absolutely. I mean, ultimately, AI is people generated. So they learn their habits, they learn how they think, how they behave. So all of those elements they pick up by the people who code them, program them. So, and bias, we can never eliminate it. There's always going to be there. No matter how knowledgeable someone is, they can decrease it and definitely impact how we behave and how we take those bias on board when making decisions. But I think it's not possible to completely eliminate it. So it's very important to know who are the people who are teaching and creating and designing the AI tools, in order to make sure and put a lot of different parameters, ensuring that there is a diversity in those in that cohort of people, the people who are creating it, and there's this, there's not just one view, there are multiple views. So ultimately, that tool that is doing the whatever task is at hand has a very diverse view of opinions of anything. Yeah,
Essentially, a sort of a part of what goes into it comes out. Yeah,
exactly that. So it's the way that I think of it is might be a little bit simplistic, but it's like a teacher and a classroom full of students. So the teacher is providing information and teaching, and some of their opinions will feed in the students, whether consciously or unconsciously as well. So it's very important the person or the people who have the power, because it is power, are properly vetted, but also there is a good diversity in the in the way that they look at the world, and the cultural backgrounds, and whatever. There may be a very diverse portfolio of people, if you like.
Makes sense. One area that I'm particularly passionate about is social mobility, and AI is developing, well, almost daily at the moment, and we can see a shift towards sort of paid for models. Now, in my opinion, that could potentially have a negative impact from those from a lower socioeconomic background who may not be able to afford access to the software and that sort of thing. So I suppose it's a two-pronged question. Do you agree with that sentiment? But also, what can be done by the industry or by recruiting organisations to actually minimise the impact on those candidates coming from a lower socioeconomic group?
That's very interesting. I was kind of like thinking about it as well. It's kind of I do get it, and I agree with you. I agree. I really, really agree to an extent. But I also see the vast majority of the population do have a smartphone, for example. So a lot of those tools are some version of them are free.
Yeah.
So, for example, you have like Perplexity or ChatGPT if we're talking about AI, or if we're talking about Microsoft, some versions like Notes, all of those areas do have all of those applications do have a version that at the very least is free. Of course, then we're talking about the advanced, the training, and all of those. So yes, there is definitely a bit of not a bit, quite a bit of advantage to people who have more socioeconomic advantage there. But I do also think that we live in a world that right now it is not a privilege to have a smartphone, but it's kind of like a basic. I mean, you're not going to see that many people anymore having like a flip phone, but or a phone, or maybe a tablet as well, or some sort of device that connects to the internet. And then most places do have free Wi-Fi as well. So there is far more opportunity to access information that was in the past.
Yeah.
I do think that there's still obviously stigma there, and of course, talking about universities, for example, and the fees that have gone even higher than they were before, that does create a big barrier. So I think there are more opportunities than there were in the past for people that wouldn't necessarily be able to have that access, but by no means is a fair system.
Yeah.
It would have been great if it was, and fantastic if there was kind of like one solution and one fits all fix. But I think we're very far from that. And I think a very big issue right now as well is the age gap. So we do have quite a lot of older people who are in the workforce, and well, rightfully so, that were never really taught those, the tech skills that most people in our age and the generations that are coming are very acute with. So there's also creating a barrier there, a big one, because they are being asked to have certain skills that they were never really asked in the past. And with more software and technology being part of day-to-day life, they are falling behind. And you ask them to, and they do, and they try. But I think there's still the expectation from employers nowadays, well, you should already have that, which is not necessary. Well, it's not fair in many occasions.
Great. You spoke about the changing demographic, but also the changes of probably skill sets as well now, which is really useful. Do you see that there is a need to go towards more skills-based recruitment? And by skills-based recruitment, I mean sort of actual skills, not sort of almost relabeling competency-based?
I think, to be honest, it should be a combination of the two. And more and more, I think that job descriptions nowadays, they're not effective whatsoever. And very often it's kind of like ends up being a laundry list that ultimately confuses the candidates and confuses everyone who reads through them, because there is the desirable, there is the necessary, but ultimately they don't really reflect what they will need to do in a day-to-day basis. It's more a bit of a something to put in there. So a job description should be very punchy in my view. When someone reads it, they should be able to understand what exactly this person would need to succeed, no more, no less than that. In terms of the assessment, I absolutely believe that they should be based on skill, because in my view, interviews are not the most effective tool to understand if a person can do the job or not. It's a bit of an indication and an incline, but ultimately, until you get that person in and start doing the job, you have no idea whether they will be able to do it or not. It's a bit of a percentage in confidence of whether they will be able to, but not really. So we do for our assessment centers, because for our volume recruitment, for example, in for the health advisors, so the co-handlers for 111, we do assessment centers, as we call them. So we ask individual the candidates to come in, and they're taking a series of assessments that ultimately assess them on what they will be doing on the job. So it's kind of like a mock assessment on the job to understand those, the listening capability, for example, because if you call, 111 or any kind of contact center, you want to make sure the person who's on the other line can listen to you effectively and take the information, as well as the IT skills that we talked about earlier, because it's when the job that someone will be doing will be primarily focused on a computer day in, day out. They would need to be able to type, to use the system effectively, or have that foundation of skills that we can then build on.
Yeah. How important is it when you're building your assessment centres that you take into account the needs of your candidates? So we're seeing a large rise in needs of neurodiversity and sort of those neurodiverse candidates, but also from a wider equality, diversity, and inclusion perspective. How important do you feel it is to have those fundamentals underpinning your assessments?
It's the most important thing, right? So how can we assess effectively candidates when we don't give them the same platform to stand on? And that's equality is no. I remember always this nice picture where you have the animals and you have them all on the same pedestal, and so that's not what equality really means. It's giving them what they need to have the same starting point. So we should never assume that people process information the same way that we do, and we should never assume that when we ask them to do something and showcase their skills, they are they put all of them to start from the same start point. So when we do our initial conversation with the candidates to invite them, and kind of like the talent screening bit, that's the cornerstone really of talent acquisition.
Yeah.
We always ask the question about whether they need reasonable adjustment when there is something that could potentially affect and impact their ability to perform.
Yeah,
but I think it's very, very important to also know that very often people don't feel comfortable disclosing that, because there is still stigma. Even though we talk more openly about it, and DEI is now a massive part of HR in a business, I think it needs to be engraved in the DNA of every company. And until we can take those biases away from the process and make them feel that when we ask them, it's not just a ticking exercise. It's not just so we can make a decision based on that, but really to help them, support them, and make sure that they get everything that they deserve. And they don't feel as comfortable to disclose it. And we still see it, day to day, even though we have through the application that in no way, shape, or form would make a decision based on that, and it's not a decision-making factor, essentially. They still feel a little bit doubtful on disclosing it. And also, what I think as well is very often when we ask they ask the question, I don't necessarily think they understand what we talent acquisition in general, and companies mean by that. So I think they don't understand what reasonable adjustment means and if they qualify for it.
Yeah.
So I think there's a bit of a kind of like an educational piece and a stigma piece. But to your question, how important it is for us, it's the heart of everything we do. We cannot claim that we are an inclusive company, we're an inclusive culture, and then exclude in whatever capacity others. So we are, the presentations that we're giving need to be in a format that is friendly for neurodiverse people. Not talking just about the font or the colors and everything, but the information is processed in easy to process, and with some exercise that we're actually doing right now with our employer brand partner, where we want to create some more material as well to ensure that when we do have neurodiverse candidates or candidates who do need reasonable adjustments, we're using the right materials in there as well. So we're flexible and adaptable in the way that we run our processes. And if some people don't flourish when they are in a social environment, they feel very anxious. So how can someone who has a lot of anxiety or might be autistic and not necessarily do well with social cues, how can they flourish in an environment that is an assessment center of potentially individual, when we know can make those adjustments, training and like ensuring that our managers understand what it really means, and how sometimes I had in the past, not this company, different company, where we were in an interview and the candidate did not look at the camera once. They were literally looking down. The responses were absolutely brilliant. You can tell this person was very knowledgeable, and they had all the necessary skills. But when we went to do the debrief with the manager, not in a bad way, not in an insulting or offensive way whatsoever, just brought the fact up. Exactly, out of I guess ignorance is the best word for it. They pointed out, I'm not really sure, because they didn't have any eye contact. And what I did there is, instead of shaming them about, okay, well, do you know about university? We don't know what this person is. I was like, okay, how is that really though relevant to assessing whether this person's going to do the job? Like, ultimately, is it something that they really need to have to do the job, or is it something that makes us feel a bit uncomfortable? And it's not something that we're familiar with because it goes out of the norm. And it's like focusing on what really matters rather than on whether we feel someone's behavior might not be exactly how we would behave in that moment, because it doesn't really matter, does it?
No, not at all. You've covered off, honestly, so much in those answers that you've covered off my next few points that I wanted to cover. So, really, really good. I'm just trying to think of a question now to underpin it all, but I suppose just based on your experience and what you set out at the start, for employers who may not be as confident in working with candidates that come from neurodiverse backgrounds, for example, what advice would you give them?
What important thing? Read most of and ask questions. I think the most important part is ask them questions. What do they need? Don't try to make assumptions. Assumptions is I think it will, because by making an assumption or trying to group people and say, okay, this person, for example, is autistic, therefore I had two more people that's what they needed, that's how adjustment I'm gonna make. We cannot group people based on a developmental condition. Each person is different. They share some characteristics, of course, common characteristics, but we cannot make assumptions based on that and just strap a label on them and just try again to put them in a little box, just so it makes us feel more comfortable and more confident. So I think a lot of people don't ask because, again, they don't want to feel that they're ignorant. So they ask them, what do you need? Instead of, knowing from get-go what they need, they feel that's what makes them confident. But having those open conversations, no one says they will be comfortable in the first few ones, or it's going to be the easiest conversation. But the whole point isn't making ourselves feel comfortable, is it? is setting people up for success, having this one-to-one conversations where you ask, okay, I go in and say I have, ADHD, for example, because I've managed people who have ADHD in the past, and so, what do you need? Okay, tell me about it. How does that affect you? How does it, you see the difference in your day-to-day life? How do you want to work? Do you want to be managed? Do you want a lot of support? Do you want to be left alone on your own device and have what is it that will make you successful? And be open and transparent if they don't know something, and then go out, read a lot about it, and ensure that they cascade that information. And don't make one person, okay, this person's doing the research, this is going to be that get-go person, the go-to person for knowledge, and then if for whatever reason that person is not there or whatever, they create single points of failure. But ultimately you cannot have one person or like one team in the whole company that makes a decision there, and you just expect them to be the experts. Everyone should be and not expert, but everyone should be in a position where they can confidently say, I can hold the conversation and I know what it is. So there's all conversations in, oh, that person was not looking at me in the eye, or, oh, this person who has dyslexia, so I don't think they will be good for the role because they can be understanding, learning. There's a lot still, unfortunately, of stereotypes and biases, and it's purely because we don't talk, we don't ask questions, and we don't make ourselves available to have a space where people can talk. We do we have an EDI and a wellbeing coordinator in DSU, and they have one-to-ones whenever needed, weekly one-to-ones for well-being, for people to kind of understand their needs, ask those questions, and see what else we can do outside of the direct line management. We have established multiple ones, but specifically for neurodiversity, a network where people have monthly meetings coming in together, either people who are neurodivergent or people who are interested or people who have some relation to neurodiversity, and a safe space where they can air any concerns, any ideas. They talk about initiatives, and then they present it back to our senior leadership team. And it takes a long time, and you're never going to get to the peak of the mountain, because as soon as you get to a peak, you see there's another peak over there.
A little step. Great.
Yeah, exactly.
That's all my questions, Eirini. Is there any closing statements that you can think of that you wanted to add, or are you okay for me to stop the recording?
I don't think so. I think like the main point that I wanted to make is what you asked, what people can do to make sure they're more inclusive in whatever, not just neurodiversity, in whatever context, like menopause, but anything, is if you're feeling uncomfortable to talk about it, push through the boundaries and talk about it. Yeah. And if you're the one feeling uncomfortable, chances are other people will feel uncomfortable, but the more we push through, the more comfortable we will be feeling about it. And the more, I think, yes, the main thing is we feel uncomfortable when we don't know something.
Yeah.
Learn, read, talk about it, and then you'll feel more comfortable. And that's, I guess, the closing statement I would like to make. And I think it actually relates to everything.